And welcome back to the Financially Simple Experience. So friends, today is a unique episode in the fact that I'm answering a question that came through our website, financiallysimple.com. Perhaps you have a question that you'd love for me to try to tackle on the podcast. I challenge you to go to financiallysimple.com, and in the top right-hand side, there's a little box there that you can click Ask Justin, or there's a drop-down that you can ask me a question. And today's question came from a reader. It came from a listener who's been listening to the podcast for some time now, as I gather. And the question was simple. Hey, Justin, how do I pivot the strategy of my business? How do I pivot the strategy of my business? Whenever I first read that question, it seemed rather short, and then my mind began to race with all the varying areas that we could address on strategy and pivoting and changing and things of that nature. So today I want to do my best in a very succinct manner to answer that particular question. You know, as business owners, we have to be adaptable. We have to be adaptable. So much of what we do is strategy. We set up our goal way out in the future, maybe a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and then we begin putting a plan into place to help us reach that goal. We go through things like SWOT analysis. We go through things like business analytics. We use analysis of our business. We hire consultants. We do a number of things in order to help us reach our goal. But what if we have a reason to change? Currently, there's several business owners that we're working with that need to change their strategy. They need to. They need to terminate some people and get the right people in place. They need to let certain products go and replace them with more sustainable products. They need to introduce recurring revenue into their particular business. What I want to deal with today is how do we successfully pivot in business? So first, let's deal with why might we need to pivot? Why? Well, perhaps in your planning, you missed a key risk. There's a risk that you didn't identify that you now see that in the planning phase wasn't apparent, but now as you're driving into the implementation phase of your plan, it's like, holy cow, I missed that. This could be devastating. So maybe you missed a key risk. Perhaps, just perhaps, another opportunity presented itself. Years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a business owner that received a government contract to create toothbrushes. Just simple mass generation of toothbrushes from this manufacturing company. And as they began rolling the toothbrushes, another contract came through which would give them substantially greater revenue with a substantially less cost, and that was to create sleeping bags. I'll never forget it. So they pivoted and put more resources into the sleeping bag manufacturing than they did in the toothbrush manufacturing. So an opportunity presents itself. Maybe, just maybe, your micro market changed. In the last year or so, we've seen a lot of changes in micro markets across the United States. With the migration of humans from one locale on the West Coast, maybe to the Southeast, or from New England to the Southeast, opportunities present themselves. Markets change. Maybe the approach or the strategy that you laid out is just not profitable. You're not going to be able to make it work. And probably one that I see the greatest is your passion changes. You were really fired up for this particular strategy, this offer, this delivery, but it just lost its sizzle. Your passion change. Nonetheless, things could happen. And these are just a few that you might experience, but there's things that could happen which cause us to rethink our strategy, to make a pivot. We must address this. Pivoting does not indicate failure. Let me say that again. Pivoting, changing a strategy, changing a key player, changing a product line does not indicate failure. In fact, I would argue it's the opposite. But it does not indicate failure. Although it's a dynamic shift from where you wanted to go and maybe the strategy we're going to use to get there, it doesn't mean you failed. Instead, pivoting by a savvy business owner who recognizes a shift in the markets, technology, whatever it may be, could actually place that business in a strategic advantage by changing. So it's the opposite many times. Let's look at a couple of examples. Netflix. Very popular program today, Netflix. My wife and I have Netflix. It began as a buy mail DVD rental service. I can remember back in the day getting DVDs from Netflix delivered to our home. Those of you who really know me may realize I'm very introverted. I'm very introverted. I don't like being around large groups of people. Now, I'll get up on stage in front of thousands and 10,000s of people and won't bother me. But after this talk is over, to get down and have a bunch of people around me, it just wears me down. So for us, Netflix was, for our family, it made a lot of sense. I didn't have to go to the Blockbuster, an old name from yesteryear, or in Southeast Georgia, we had this little country store called Pop and Go Video, Pop and Go Video. We didn't have to go there to these places. I could use Netflix. They would send us a DVD. But they pivoted as soon as streaming video became. They became a streaming video platform. And then recently they've added their own production company. And because of such, they've been an unbelievable success story to now roughly $109 billion over the last decade in market cap value. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I'll give you another one. Do you remember the platform called Burbn? B-U-R-B-N. B-U-R-B-N. Do you remember that platform? Perhaps not. See, it was originally designed as a mobile check-in app, but the founders quickly realized it was too similar to Foursquare, and they changed. They changed it to focus in on what they knew, and the name shifted from Burbn to Instagram. And Facebook purchased it some $1 billion 2 years later. Pretty crazy. How about the old adage or the old product that no doubt you've played with, and perhaps maybe even your children have played with, Play-Doh. Play-Doh. That's right, that colorful dough that I like to make snowmen out of and just roll in. I used to make the long snakes. It was my favorite thing to do. Was roll Play-Doh out in this long line. You'd almost get it rolling across the table. And I had some rolls that were like 9 foot long. And you put a snake head on the end, a little bit of rattle on the tail of it. But Play-Doh, we realized Play-Doh began in 1912 under the name Kutol, K-U-T-O-L. And it was originally a cleaning product used to remove coal soot on the walls, take the coal soot off the walls from the old coal burning furnaces back in the early 1900s. To avoid a threat being posed by the gas heating. So what was happening was as the houses were moving from coal burning to gas production, they began adding bright colors to their product line, and they changed their name. And now here we have Play-Doh. That's been around for over 100 years, all because of a pivot. And friends, there are many, many, many more pivots that are happening that directly impacts our lives. But I thought those three were pretty powerful. So let's look at then, if we know that pivoting is okay, it doesn't indicate failure, and we may have many reasons why we desire to pivot, and that's okay. How do we build a strategy to pivot? How do we change a business which is steaming down the tracks in one direction to a completely different direction? How do we do that? You can successfully change your direction of your company. Let me say that again. You can successfully change the direction of your company. It is possible to pivot, but only if you do these few things. The first is we have to take a long view. Oftentimes when you pivot, it's not going to happen overnight. Now, if you take a long view, you can go back to some handy tools that I repeat over and over, and I realize they're petty in the field of business, but they're so powerful. You can go back and continue to do SWOT analysis. You can do SWOT analysis, find out where strengths and weaknesses lie within your business. Then you could take the results of the SWOT analysis and you could say, okay, how are we going to take our strengths and lean into this new direction that we want to go? Perhaps, just perhaps, you can look at trends that come up through the SWOT analysis. Think about Netflix. If Netflix did not look at the trends of moving into digital streaming, then they would not be the powerhouse they are today. In fact, they may have gone the way of Blockbuster or Pop and Go Video. What if Kutol had not seen the impact of gas heating coming into the American public in the early 1900s and change by adding some colors to change it around a little bit? Then perhaps you and I would have missed that whole memory of playing with Play-Doh as kids, making those long snakes on the dining room table like I used to do. But what they did is they took a long view. They looked at what was directly in front of them through basically a SWOT analysis, saw their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, took the threat positions and applied it to the opportunity position, and then leaned into their strengths to drive forward in their business pivot. So what they had to do was take a long view, realizing that a pivot was not something that was going to happen really quick. The next thing you have to do is you have to remember you have to have short-term sustainability. Whenever you pivot in a company, it's going to require more time and resources than operating the company in its current mode. There was a strategy discussion that I was sitting in on not too long ago with a pretty prominent client, and there was a pivot being discussed. And the pivot made sense given all the different data points that we were looking at. But what didn't make sense was the amount of resources that the executive team was willing to provide to the pivot. And so as I began asking some probing questions, which if you've ever been in a meeting with me, I ask a lot of questions, trying to help people think through answers. As I began asking these probing questions, it became apparent that they had not considered the amount of resources that would be needed in the short term. They weren't thinking about the sustainability of the company as they were in this pivot mode. When Netflix began to venture into the streaming side of things, they didn't drop their current offer. They continued to have their mail-in DVD system, but they had to find additional capital, additional talent, set up different systems, processes, marketing materials, a structure of the company in order to pivot the company from one to the other. So if you're considering a pivot, you have to remember short-term sustainability. You have to have the resources, whether it be money, people, time, in order to shift the company's direction. I'm reminded in this analogy of a detour. So I can remember when TomTom, maybe you remember that, or Garmin, first entered into the portable map direction system. I remember having a TomTom on my windshield back before maps were incorporated into our phones as they are today. And I programmed a particular destination at TomTom. As we're driving down the road, it started saying, redirecting, redirecting, redirecting. And I was looking at this crazy computer screen. I knew where I was going, kind of, sort of, but it had me going way up the road to turn around to come way back to get on the correct route. That's not that dissimilar in short-term sustainability. Oftentimes, as we're making a pivot, it's going to take us longer than we anticipate, cost us more than we're going to anticipate, take us out of our direction that we were trying to head in order to get back on the trajectory to where we're trying to head. Think about TomTom and when we think about short-term sustainability. As you begin this movement, KPIs and monitoring are paramount. So as you begin moving from one direction to the next, you need to go ahead and set up all your measuring tools, all your accountability, remember SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, repeatable, time-bound, SMART, techniques on this new direction so that you can know the speed of which to relinquish the old direction, to stop selling the DVDs and move strictly to streaming product. You cannot do that without the measurements being put in place early on. So during this sustainability time period, you have to realize a few things. It's going to take you a little longer. You've got to be able to sustain the company during the pivot, and you're going to have to be able to measure it. Now, as you make the pivot, it's vital to begin listening to the outside voices. Now, you probably have never heard me say that before. Oftentimes as business owners, outside voices are just noise. I'm re-listening this time. I'm listening to Atlas Shrugged, the old book from Ayn Rand. I've read it many times in my career, and I'm listening to it. I'm listening intently this time on how the business owners are dealing with the negativity, how they're addressing the government control, the socialistic type of view. I'm listening to how they're addressing it, whether or not they're even acknowledging it, whether they're putting their heads down. And many times we business owners, if we're completely honest, we'll just shun out the naysayers. We have to, because there are many. There are many that say things like, you'll never succeed. Why are you doing that? Hey, we want from you. We often feel like the players in that old book where it's like, enough's enough. We often feel that way. But in this moment, we have to listen to the outside voices. Knowing what our customers are saying as we introduce this new pivot is paramount. We have to have a pulse on the market. We have to have a pulse on the industry. So, for example, in the case of Play-Doh, knowing how and when to pivot came from a combination of newly emerging heating technology, that coming from the oil, as well as a nursery school teacher. Think about that. This company had developed this product to clean soot off the walls, and they had colored it to make it, whenever they had the oil coming into the home heating systems, they had colored it so that they could make it more attractive to be able to continue use. But yet here's a preschool teacher, a nursery school teacher, that's out here letting the kids play with that. And Plato listened. And here we have Plato today, generations later, because they were listening. See, gas heat had threatened it, but Joseph McVicker knew that the company would be in trouble if he didn't take immediate action. So he was trying to figure out what to do. And he's approached by his sister-in-law, a family member who wasn't even in the business. And she said, hey, this material that you have, I'm using it for modeling clay for our young students. I'm teaching them how to mold things. She explained that the compound was so much easier for their little hands to manipulate than the old hard clay that so many potters would use at that time. And as he was looking at the business, this pivot that he was trying to figure out how to weigh, the idea came from his sister-in-law, a school teacher, that said, hey, how can I make it work? He was objective. He wasn't obstinate in his mind. He was saying, hey, I'm willing and able to think through this with you. He was listening to it. He was objective. He had a business advisor who came alongside that provided additional reinforcement. Hey, you can make this work. He was doing external research, looking at, can the market support it? How many kids would use this? How many schools across the country could we sell this to? Is it the same population demographics as we have in the home space? Are we at saturation points? Could we penetrate? Those type of questions. He's going through this with his consultants, all because he was listening. The other thing that happens, though, whenever you come into this pivot is you have to communicate with your team. I was reminded as of late in our own company how powerful communication can be. We've been working on this strategy called cultural revolution, setting the right culture within our company. And every week I give a motivation, typically 2, 3, 4 minutes long. It's a story with an application involved, almost like a fable or a parable of late. And as I'm communicating with the leadership team, I'm hearing things back of how the power of these concepts, just simple, I'm going to call them grandma wisdom pearls, right? Just old front porch swinging style advice that we all know. It's nothing rocket science. But by putting this out there, we're communicating with the team, and the team is able to move and act and take the grasp to change the culture to where we desire it to be. However, whenever you're going through a pivot, it's not just a once a week thing. You're now having to explain to the employees, which is a very difficult thing, what is transpiring. Think about this. Perhaps in your company, a pivot could be termination of an office manager, replacing an office manager. I'm thinking of one particular client right now that if they don't do this, they're going to stay stagnant. They're staying stagnant. I can see the writing on the wall. I can see it in the financials. I can hear it. And if they don't make the hard decision to terminate and replace, then they're going to remain stagnant. And it's tough. It's a tough conversation because now you have to realize, again, that pivoting is not failure. We got to this point. How do we go from here to there? Now you're having to have conversations with your team that are uncomfortable. I've had to do this recently. We have to have conversations that are uncomfortable whenever you make changes to personnel. We need to make changes to product. But think about this. Maybe you're changing product that was somebody's brainchild. One of your key friends, one of your employees, maybe a colleague of yours, maybe a business partner who created this concept or this strategy that you're having to say, hey, we can't go this way anymore. And now their brainchild. How dare you? How dare you criticize my baby? But most of all, friends, it's us, the primary business owner, the decision maker, that we have to communicate with our own self. We have to speak in light of positivity. There's so much negativity that's thrown at us on a daily basis from clients, from customers, from family, from life, from politics. Everything's negative. And in a pivotal time period, communication is paramount, not just to your employees, not just to maybe the stakeholders or the brain trust, but also to yourself. Being transparent, being authentic, taking time to explain why will successfully charge a pivot for your company. I submit to you that unless you follow those actions, a pivot will be utter failure. It'll be utter failure. Unless you listen, communicate, plan, stay nimble, work on the transitional period, any pivot that you consider will be utter failure. And friends, I have stories upon stories upon stories of failure. I've watched it for over 2 decades. What I want for you is I want success. I want you to be able to reach your aspirations, your goals. Whenever I did the transition of my company, early 2022, I was asked, Justin, would you not remain an advisor? And I said, no, I'm going to remain an advisor because I have a group of people that I know their aspirations, I know their dreams, and I want to see them reach their dreams. It's become a personal mission of mine to help people be all they can be. And I realize that's the Army slogan, be all you can be in the Army. I realize that, but as I've often said, the cemetery is the saddest place to be because people's dreams die with them. So much wisdom is buried and is never captured. Friends, I don't want that for any of us. I want each of us to live this life that we have every single 24-hour day. I want to live it with all the vim and vigor I can have, everything I can muster. We'll leave it all on the field, so to speak, within my family, within my friends, within our clients. I want to give everything I have, knowing that the naysayers are out there. You're the same way, knowing the naysayers are out there. And perhaps, just perhaps, we have to pivot. It's not failure. It's business. Let's lean into it. So perhaps, just perhaps, as we end this episode, you have a question, just like this particular question, that piques my interest. Hey, I challenge you to go to financiallysimple.com and just leave your question there. Our team monitors that. Maybe you leave it on one of our social media channels. And if it's something that we feel like could provide a lot of context for a lot of folk, then just like today's episode, we want to answer that question. Hey, while you're on the Financially Simple channel, sign up for our newsletter. We send out a newsletter with some of our best writings, some stories, some illustrations. Whenever things happen, then we'll create content. For example, whenever we're dealing with the PPP and the EIDL loans, we had daily content going out for our business owners trying to help them through our newsletter. So I challenge you to go sign up for our newsletter. Until next time, friends, I realize life is hard. It is. But life is good. Life is good. And it can be frustrating. It can be. It doesn't have to be. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Hey, y'all go out and make it. You got to make it a great day.